Ladies and gentlemen, the judges are back and we have with us the results. We know which team will be joining the others in the semi-finals of the Jamaica Civil Service Association High Schools Debate Competition for 2025. The scores ending this round, one team ends on 271 points to the other team's 265 points, a 6-point difference. So how did the judges see this debate? Well, let's read the motion again. This house that are given limited resources, this house would prioritize supporting public sector workers who care for elderly relatives over making modest upgrades to elder care facilities. Now, there was a definitional clash over the key term modest. What does modest mean? Well, Team St. George's tells us in their very first speech from Javan that modest upgrade looks a particular way and it is a very specific way. Javan tells us that a modest upgrade is one of cosmetic upgrades and aesthetics. It's painting over a building. It's making care of those aesthetic things. And Javan tells us that it has to be that way because there already exists within status quo certain safety mechanisms and minimum safety standards. And therefore, any upgrade cannot include, for example, things like a staircase or walkways or those basic safety mechanisms and infrastructure, in as much as in status quo, there are regulations to maintain that level of control. Therefore, any modest upgrade is not that. Well, Team Immaculate didn't agree. In fact, at the very start of their debate, Olivia tells us that that's not the definition of modesty. Modesty isn't just painting over some walls. Modesty, Immaculate Conception contends, is doing just enough given the limited resources to actually effect some change. That could mean like an inspection, that could mean registration, that could mean taking care of some low-hanging fruit that need to be taken care of to ensure that these institutions exist within at least a serviceable level. That's what we understood from Immaculate Conception. This definitional debate continued right down all the way into the reply speeches. So, with that said, how did the judges view this definitional clash? We think that it was a bit tongue-in-cheek of St. George's to characterize modesty as simply an aesthetic situation. We think that if that was the case, it would be immensely difficult for Immaculate Conception High School to justify their stance. We think that if a modest upgrade is simply a matter of just painting over an elder care facility, comparing that to the counterfactual of presenting money in someone's pocket is just like an objectively unbalanced debate that favors St. George's in a way that we don't think is particularly fair. And so the judges agreed with Team Immaculate Conception that the definition of modest being posited by St. George's was not the definition that should obtain in this debate, and it wasn't the most fair of definitions. And so the debate would have proceeded with what Immaculate Conception thinks modesty is, and what the judges conclude modesty is in this debate context. Nevertheless, there were still some brilliant ideas that came out of the debate, and so that wasn't the end all be all of the debate by any means. So then, what did we get then that we credited St. George's for? St. George's tells us that what we need to do is to put the money in the hands of the public sector worker. Excuse me. St. George's tells us we need to do this for several reasons, but how we're going to do this is with this particular policy. And Javan, good job. That was a good policy. We think that your policy was structured, it was clear, it took into consideration limited resources, it took into consideration what you can and cannot do. We think it was clever. We think it was clever to actually say that it is going to be funneled through the existing HR and payroll systems. Therefore, you cannot mitigate the necessity of building out entire infrastructure to implement your policy. Immaculate Conception contended that your definition, your policy, fell outside the remit of a limited budgetary constraint. We didn't agree. We think your policy can be implemented with a limited budget constraint. So good job on that, job on defending and creating such a policy. So now the policy is clear. What was the justification for the policy? So we hear specifically coming out from team St. George's from Javon that the public sector workers are particularly vulnerable. These are really important people. And what's happening in status quo is that they're burnt out. They're burnt out because they have two jobs. They have their regular public sector work job, right? They have their they have their regular public sector worker jobs, and they have the job of being a caregiver at home. St. George's tells us, particularly from Javon, the second speaker, that this is bad because that is going to cause people to be burnt out. That's going to lead to all sorts of bad outcomes. When people don't get the support that they need, they perform worse at work. And this is particularly important because these are public sector workers, your nurses, your doctors, your teachers, this is particularly bad. And what's going to happen is that they're going to quit their job, they're going to spend less time in their job, or they're going to migrate. They tell us that this is bad. And Javon tells us as well that you actually get reduced household stability when it is that these individuals don't have enough money to take care of their elderly families. We see them default into really bad things like informal loans, being susceptible to shock, to economic shocks, and that's really bad. We thought that was really good, Javon, and we love that. But then here comes Immaculate Conception High School to to take all of these concerns that St. George's has and, funnily enough, agree with them. See, Immaculate Conception tells us that, yeah, we agree. We need to take care of our public sector workers. They're stressed, they're overburdened, they're burnt out. That's why we need to stop having them being forced to take care of the elderly people. Immaculate Conception tells us that if we create these modest upgrades to these elder care facilities, we can do just enough so that these same public sector workers feel comfortably enough to put their elderly relatives in these spaces so that they'll get, at the very least, an adequate amount of care within these spaces and relieve from them that burden. So then the judges weigh the idea. Most teams concede on the stress of the public sector workers and that we need to do something to alleviate their stress. Where do we wait? We think that when we weigh these two ideas, we buy Immaculate Conception's case more. That the best way to alleviate the stress on these public sector workers is to remove the necessity of them taking care of their elderly relatives and put them into the institutions that can actually take care of them. These institutions have the capacity, the ability, right? And so there were many other contentions in the debate, such as the declining birth rate, affordability, the capacity of these elder care facilities to do what it is that they say they need to do, right? Can they actually do what it is that they need to do? Many of these contentions were argued and debated amongst the judges. But when all was said and done, the judges would have made a decision. And so, ladies and gentlemen, we invite you to unmute your mics so that we can hear your authentic reaction. This is a big indeed. This is a big deal. The team that will be joining the ranks of Wilmer's Boys School, joining the ranks of Knox College in the semifinals of this competition is a team in opposition Immaculate Conception High School.
Congratulations, guys. Congratulations.
Congratulations, Immaculate Conception High School. Well played, St. George's College. You really have shown our viewers and Jamaica and the wider viewed audience why you are indeed one of the top debate institutions in Jamaica. And we look forward to seeing more of you. And so, ladies and gentlemen, your champions for this match, moving on to the semifinals, Immaculate Conception High School. The best debater from this match comes to us from the winning team, Immaculate Conception High. And that speaker Yes. And that speaker, ladies and gentlemen, was the reply speaker from Immaculate Conception, Aisha Stone. Congratulations, Aisha. We loved how you summarized the debate, really weighed into the clashes and proved why your team has won. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Join us in a few moments where we will see two more teams vying for the last match, the last spot in this competition. Cornwall College versus Montego Bay High School for girls. Two teams coming out of Western Jamaica unfazed by Hurricane Melissa. The motion they'll be debating. This House believes that managers should be held more responsible for occupational health outcomes than senior policymakers in the public sector. Until then, ladies and gentlemen, have a wonderful rest of your day.